Welcome to Profiles on Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18. I'm Charlie Walters. My guest today is Jim Kweskin. During the early 1960s folk revival in the United States, Jim Kweskin and the Jug Band were one of the most influential artists around. They were successful both commercially and artistically, which doesn't always go together. The band broke up in the late 1960s, but Jim has continued on as a solo act and occasionally as a duo act or a trio act. He came to Nantucket on June 1st to do a solo concert at the Nantucket Athenaeum. And we were fortunate enough to have him come out to Channel 18 studio, and we're going to talk, and he's going to sing a couple of songs in the course of the next 45 minutes. Thanks for coming, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to ask you in a few minutes what a jug band is, but let's start at the beginning. When and how did you get interested in what kind of music?
Well, when I was a kid, my father had a collection of old records. In those days, it was 78s. Some folks who are watching this may remember 78s. They were before vinyl and before CD and before cassette. They were the main kind of record all the way through the first half of the 20th century. My father had some old jazz records that I really loved. Jelly Roll Morton, Fats Waller, Bessie Smith, Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet. Other than Louis Armstrong, these may be names that most people aren't familiar with, but they were the great swing jazz artists of the 20s and 30s. And I fell in love with that music. And I was the only one of my friends who even knew who those people were or listened to it. But I was sitting up in my room when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, grooving on Bix Beiderbecke, you know. So that music got inside of me at a very young age. When I was a young teenager, my parents sent me to a summer camp, actually 3 years in a row. And the counselors there, many of them played the guitar and sang folk songs. And so at that point, I had already heard Pete Seeger and Burl Ives, the Weavers. But now I was watching people who could actually play the guitar and sing in person, and that really got me. That's what I wanted to do. So I got into folk music, and I was already into early jazz. So by the time I got to college, what I really wanted to do was combine the two. And I saw this fellow I went to Boston University, and went to the Club 47, and I saw this fellow named Eric von Schmidt. And I walked in and was watching him on stage, and he was playing the guitar by himself and singing Buddy Bolden's Blues, which I knew to be a Jelly Roll Morton tune that he did with his jazz band back in the 20s. And I said, I didn't know you could do that. You could take these old jazz songs and just play them and sing them while you're playing the guitar. And that's kind of how I got started in that direction.
Club 47 is long gone, but for those of you out there who know Cambridge, Passim is where Club 47 ended up. Actually, it was in two different locations.
Started out on Orbit Street, but it moved to Palmer Street, where it still is.
Yeah. What is a jug band?
Well, interestingly enough, in relationship to what I play and the kind of music I like, jug band really is just old-time, if you break it down to just the basics, it's old-time jazz and blues played on folk-type and homemade instruments. In other words, instead of trumpets and trombones and saxophones, it's kazoos and harmonicas and fiddles. And instead of a tuba or a string bass, it's a jug. And it was very down-homey kind of music, originated in the South, black musicians in places like Memphis and Louisville. There was the Memphis Jug Band and Gus Cannon's Jug Stompers in Memphis. There was the Dixieland Jug Blowers in Louisville. And there were many other jug bands, but those were the most prominent, and those were the best ones.
Explain how it works to play a jug.
Well, a jug is something you blow into.
It really is a jug.
It is a crockery. Well, originally they were crockery jugs, although the guy who played jug with my band later on often used a plastic jug. But it resonates the sound. You make the sound with your mouth. It's a kind of a bass sound, but not too far from a fart. But it's very, it's very musical, and the jug resonates that sound, and it takes the place of a bass.
And how do you hit a particular note?
With your mouth, shape of your mouth.
You're not. It isn't like a kazoo where you're humming into it.
No.
Okay. So it's the position of your mouth.
Yeah.
And how wide your mouth is open.
Yeah. It's just. I mean, in some ways, it's very similar to like a bugle. You know, a bugle which doesn't have keys or anything like that. You can keep changing the note by how you move your lips. Well, similar concept.
So how did Jim Kweskin and the Jug Band come to be?
Well, I was playing. Let's see. I got to Boston University, as a freshman in 1958. I started going around to the different clubs and hearing all these wonderful local musicians. And I started combining my knowledge of the old jazz tunes with my love of folk music. Started playing songs by people like Jesse Fuller and Mississippi John Hurt and Pink Anderson, all of whom played a kind of swingy ragtime folk music. It was not Appalachian ballads. It was much closer to jazz, early jazz. And so I was traveling around the country, went out, came back a couple times. And then one night in 1963, I was playing at the Club 47. And I had a whole bunch of musicians on stage with me. They were just friends. We were jamming. There was a fiddle player and a harmonica player, and Fritz Richmond was playing the washtub bass, which some of you may know is just take an old but sheet metal washtub that they used to use to wash clothes in many, many years ago, turn it upside down, put a pole on a string, and play it like a bass. Anyway, Fritz Richmond, he was master of that instrument, believe it or not. And we were all jamming on stage, and I didn't know it, but the owner and president of Vanguard Records was in the audience. He had already been up there. He's the one who signed Joan Baez to Vanguard Records a year or so before he came up. I guess he came up to see us, although I don't know whether he just happened to be there. But anyway, he came up to me after the show and said, "How would you like to make a record with that band?" And I said, "Well, that's not really a band, but I'd love to make a record. Give me 3-4 months and I'll put a band together and we'll do that. I'll make a record." So I had a record contract before I had a band. And then I went around and I had played with Fritz. He was the obvious choice. He was absolutely out of town when I was trying to put the band together. I had to call him in California and say, "You got to come back. We're forming a jug band, and you got to play your bass, and you got to learn how to play the jug." Because he played the bass.
He'd never played jug before he joined the band.
Correct. Right. He was a washtub bass player. He became a master jug player, but I believe it or not, if that's hard to conceive of, but he really was. Later on, I'll just jump ahead a little bit. On the Prairie Home Companion show, he played the Flight of the Bumblebee on the jug.
Really?
Yeah. And he was an incredible I mean, most people who play the washtub bass, it just goes thump, 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 and it's hardly a note. It's just that vibration. He played solid, in-tune notes. He had a great sense of bass line. Then he was Fritz, and I had done a couple of gigs with Jeff Muldor. We didn't play music together, but we were on the bill together. And he was a great blues singer. Still is.
Still is.
Yeah. So, and I'm not a blues. I don't sing blues. I mean, maybe some up-tempo jazzy blues, but I don't sing the country blues kind of stuff that he did. So that was Fritz and Jeff and myself, and then the banjo player. I wanted a banjo player, and I asked Bob Siggins, who was the banjo player with the Charles River Valley Boys. So he became my banjo player. And then I had a friend named David Simon, who was also known as Bruno Wolf, who played the harmonica and also sang a lot of Leadbelly type songs. So that was the first jug band. We got together, we rehearsed for 3 months, worked up a whole repertoire, and made the first jug band record.
And to put it in context, Vanguard Records at that time was a very big label within the context of folk music.
It was the premier label in the folk music genre. Yeah, it was of course because they had Joan.
Yes.
That was she was their biggest artist, but they had a lot of people. You know, with, I can't even remember all the
Well,
artists.
Eric Anderson later on.
Eric
was
Anderson,
one of
Ian
them.
and Sylvia.
Yeah. Buffy St. Marie.
Buffy St. Marie, correct. Doc Watson.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, now, there's folk music and there's folk music. There were all sorts of folk players at that time. The ones we just mentioned, but also people like Bob Dylan and Dave Van Ronk. And Phil Oakes, Tom
Interesting
Rush.
story. I just jumped ahead. Bob Dylan. I was living in Greenwich Village at one point in 1962. I just there for a few months and gigging at the Gaslight Cafe down on McDougal Street. And Dylan had just arrived in town too, so we got to know each other. And we were in our very early 20s. And I got a gig, and so there was 4 shows a night. This went on for about 2 weeks. The first show was Peter Stampfel, who eventually formed the Holy Modal Rounders.
Yes.
The second set was me. The third set was Dylan. And the fourth set was the 3 of us together.
Really?
Yeah.
And the tickets were probably $1 or $2.
If that. And we used to sing Woody and Cisco songs, and I would sing the Cisco Houston harmony part, and Dylan would sing the Woody Guthrie part, and we did a bunch of those.
We mentioned the Gaslight and Club 47. What are some of the other venues you were playing at that time?
Well, I mean, in Boston, there was the Cafe Yana, there was the Golden Vanity, there was the one in Copley Square, I've forgotten the name of at the moment. And in New York, there was Gertie's Folk City, and there was the Gaslight. And then across the country, there was the Ash Grove in L.A. There was the, in Berkeley, there was the Cabal, and there was Freight and Salvage. I think Freight and Salvage was a little bit later, though. Anyway, there was clubs all over. There's clubs in most college towns in the 60s, especially the early to mid-60s, had at least 1 or 2 folk clubs. So you could travel around, go to Minneapolis or go to Ann Arbor, Michigan or Bloomington, Indiana. They almost all had a folk club.
Now, most of the other folk players at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, were solo performers.
Correct.
The group
Well,
groups were not the norm. They were there, but they were not the norm.
That's not quite accurate, and I'll tell you why. Because there was a lot of the imitation and groups formed to be similar to the Kingston Trio. It was a whole different kind of approach to folk music. It was a much more commercial, popular approach to folk music. They wore uniforms, striped shirts or whatever they had, and they had their set pattern, and they would take these traditional folk songs and make them into pop songs. Which I wasn't particularly fond of that music, but I was grateful that it was popular because it made the whole genre of folk music popular in the country, and my band fit into that basic genre, so there was clubs and recordings open and available to us. So we were lucky, actually, because I formed a kind of folky band at a time when folk music was quite popular, and the people who were popular, the most popular, were Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the Kingston Trio, and the Highwaymen, and the Journeymen, and all these other commercial folk acts. So there were quite a number of those kinds of groups.
It's one thing to be a good singer. It's one thing to be a good instrumentalist. But being a band leader is a whole different skill set. Obviously, you did that well, but talk a bit about that.
Well, our band was very democratic. We all had a lot to offer. Everybody chipped in. I wasn't a dictator. And we did arrangements together. We'd argue a lot. No, it's too fast. No, let's do it in this key. Let's do slow. Let's do this. Let's do that. Whatever. No, I don't want to do that. But we would fight like crazy. But we'd hone a song down and get it to where we were all happy with it. And once we got it there, it usually was the best it could be for us. And it's listening. I mean, one of the most important things of being a musician and being a band leader is listening. Listening to what the other musicians are saying, and then when you're performing, listening to what the other musicians are doing. And I always tell young people, when they ask me, what do you have to do to become a good musician? I say, you have to learn how to listen, because that's the most important thing. What I do, and friends of mine do, is we play songs that are old. I'm not a songwriter. Talk about the definition of folk music. It's changed so much over the years. Back in the old days, a folk singer was somebody who sang traditional songs. Matter of fact, the John Jacob Niles, who played the dulcimer, and back in the 30s, if you told folks that you had written a song, then you would not be considered a folk singer anymore. Nowadays, most folk singers are singer-songwriters.
Yes.
He was performing, and he wrote "Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair," and he told everybody that he found it in the hills. Because if he had told them that he'd written it, then he would no longer be considered a folk singer.
Interesting.
But in any case, what I was going to say is that we do old songs that we got from records from the 20s and 30s, and sometimes earlier. And I was performing not that long ago, and in front of a nice audience. And I was talking to them, and I said, well, okay, nowadays if you do a song that was done by somebody else, and like if you do a Beatles song or a Creedence Clearwater song or even somebody, a Taylor Swift song, it's called covering it. Yeah. You cover somebody else because it was either written by somebody or they're known for it. Or Bob Dylan's song, you're covering it. I said, but if I do a song that was recorded 90 years ago, am I covering it? And somebody in the audience said, no, you're uncovering it. And I thought that was really cool. So that's what I do. I uncover songs.
You uncover songs. Yeah. Well put. You're going to sing 2 songs for us, so we're going to take a break from the talking part and let you sing a song right now.
Well, the song I'm going to do is originally done by Uncle Dave Macon, and it's called "The Wreck of the Tennessee Gravy Train." And it's about something that really happened in the early 20th century. The state of Tennessee bonded $5 million for road work and bridge work. Now, $5 million is a lot of money, but you can imagine 100 years ago it was really a lot of money, like 10 times or more what it's worth. And the money disappeared between the bankers and the governor and whoever. It just was gone. It was a big scandal. So this is a song about a time when bankers and politicians used to steal people's money. Of course.
Never happens anymore.
That sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. Wreck of the Tennessee Gravy Train. The people of Tennessee want to know who wrecked our gravy train. The one we thought was run so well, and now who can we blame? We want to know who greased the track, started her down the road. Same old train contained our money to build a highway road. And now we're up against it and no use to raise a row. But of all the times I've ever seen, we're sure up against it now. And the only thing that we can do is to do the best we can. So follow me, good people, bound for the promised land. Well, I could be a banker without the least excuse, but look at the treasure of Tennessee and tell me what's the use. We lately bonded Tennessee for just $5 million. The bonds were issued and the money tied up, and now we're in tough luck. And now we're up against it and no use to raise a row. But of all the times I've ever seen, we're sure up against it now. And the only thing that we can do is to do the best we can. So follow me, good good people bound for the promised land. Some blame it all on parties, some blame it on others you see. But now that you can plainly see what's happened to Tennessee, for the engineer pulled the throttle, the conductor rang the bell, the brakeman hollered all aboard, and the banks all went to hell. And now we're up against it and no use to raise a row. But of all the times I've ever seen, we're sure up against it now. And the only thing that we can do is to do the best we can. So follow me, good people, I'm bound for the promised land.
Jim Kweskin doing the wreck of the Tennessee gravy train. I want to talk about the context of the historical context of what you were doing. The first Jug Band album came out in 1963, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
In 1964, the Beatles came along, and in 1965, Dylan went electric. How did that affect you and the band?
Well, we were not influenced musically by either one of those, the Beatles or Bob Dylan, because we were playing old music, old songs. You know, we were our versions of old songs. On the scene, the music scene, the entertainment scene, I'll give you an example of how it affected us. My band had a gig in Chicago at a small venue, and we didn't know it till we got there. The place seated about maybe 150, 200 people, maybe more, maybe 300 people. We found out that very same night the Beatles were playing in Wrigley Field.
Oh, boy.
I think maybe 12 people showed up to our gig. So it affected us that way, but not very often. That was just a particular, bad timing for us.
Exactly.
Dylan going electric, rock was already on the rise, and folk rock was already happening. That whole Dylan going electric thing is, there's a lot of talk about it, but I mean, he played great music, he was just at Newport, it was too loud, that's all. But in any case, we would start playing in those psychedelic ballrooms in San Francisco at the Avalon and the Fillmore. And the opening act, before we went on, was Big Brother and the Holding Company, or The Doors, both of whom were just getting started. And they were so loud. And of course, we were just this little acoustic band playing acoustic guitars and fiddles and harmonicas, and people were it was so loud, the band before us, that people could barely hear us. And we were just coming through this we didn't have big amps, so they had these giant amps, and they could blast people right out of the room. So on that level, those particular gigs were not that great for us. I mean, people remember them and they tell us how much they loved us there then, but we were not happy with the fact that everybody was so loud and we were not.
Well, there's a documentary film out there called Festival, which has footage from several Newport folk festivals in the early and mid-'60s, and you were in that.
Yes.
How many times did you play Newport?
5 years in a row.
Really?
64, 5, 6, 7, and 8.
And presumably you would have continued to play had the Jug Band still existed.
Yeah.
Or did you play as a solo artist after that?
After the Jug Band broke up?
Yes.
Yes.
At Newport.
No. Well, in 68 it was not the Jug Band, but I was playing with other musicians. But yeah.
Now, I asked you before we came on if you would talk about doing the Steve Allen Show.
Well, in 1964, we were booked to do the Steve Allen Show, which was at that time one of the 2 nighttime entertainment shows that were on after 11 o'clock at night. Very similar to what now, it used to be Letterman and Leno, and then now it's Jimmy Fallon and Steve Colbert and Kimmel and Fallon and like that. It was that kind of a show, a nighttime where the host would talk and then he'd bring guests on and all that kind of stuff.
It was a very big deal. For one thing, it was a longer show. It was from 11:15 until 1.
Yeah, it was an hour and a half.
And there wasn't cable. So
Correct.
people didn't have
Too much
all
choice.
these. Yeah, so
Right.
it was a very big accomplishment to get on that show.
Yeah, and the other thing is that it wasn't nowadays when they have a musical act, it comes on last, and it's the end of the show, and they do one song. On the first Steve Allen show, we were the first guests, and we did 3 songs. And then the second Steve Allen show, we did 2 songs, and the third Steve Allen show, we did 2 songs. So there were 7. I actually have video of it. I have it in my collection of us on the Steve Allen show. We did 7 songs on 3 shows. The first Steve Allen show we did was very funny because the announcer said, and here he is, Steve Allen, and out from the side stage, and the camera is on him, comes Johnny Carson.
Who was not that well known at that point. He was known, but he was not huge.
He had his own show.
Oh, he did have his own. I thought he took over Steve Allen's show.
No. He took over from Jack Parr.
Oh, okay.
No, he had his own show. They were on opposing networks. They were supposedly competitors with each other. So this would be like if Stephen Colbert was on and somebody said, and here he is, Stephen Colbert, and Jimmy Fallon walked out. It would be like that. This is the equivalent. So Johnny Carson walks out, and Steve Allen didn't know he was going to be there. It was a surprise. And he just went crazy. They started laughing, and then they sat down, and they talked to each other, and they were, the comedy patter back and forth. And then Steve says, oh, we have this musical guest. And so we did one song, and then they both came over and played with us. And Johnny Carson played kazoo with the Jim Kweskin Jug Band. That was fun.
I'll bet it was. Now, you dissolved the band in 1968,
Correct.
and that was your decision.
Correct. The first 4 years of the Jug Band were magic. I loved every minute of it. It was growing and advancing and a challenge, and the music was exciting. By the 5th year, I was starting to get tired of it. It was getting repetitious. We were starting to imitate ourselves. We were starting to get to a place where we were, I don't know. It just wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't something I loved doing. I stopped loving it, and so I decided, after some number of things had happened in my life, which I can go into, but personal stuff that made me realize that I needed to be doing something, moving in a different direction, musically and personally. And so I broke up the band.
Now, at your peak of touring, how many nights a year would you be out doing concerts?
Oh, I don't know. 100 maybe?
100?
Maybe, something like that.
And the rest of the time, would you take long breaks, or would you... Between concerts, would you be rehearsing and recording and?
Correct. Then the second, yes, rehearsing and recording. Although I had a family, I had a wife and kids, and raising little kids and stuff. So I had a personal life, that also took a lot of my time, rightfully so, with my children. So it was my personal life also was obviously extremely important to me, and the more time I could spend with them, the better.
I mentioned you did 6 albums with the Jug Band, not counting greatest hits albums.
Is that right? Let me see. First one, Jim Kweskin Jug Band. The second one was Jug Band Music. The third one was called Sea Reverse Side. The fourth...
Relax Your Mind is in there somewhere.
That's not the Jug Band, really.
That was a solo album?
Well, no, it was just a trio. It was Fritz Richmond on washtub bass, Mel Lyman on harmonica, and me. It's kind of like the Jug Band. And then we moved over to Reprise and did the Garden of Joy album on a different label, Warner Reprise.
What I'm wondering is, are there outtakes from those sessions that never came out? Songs that you recorded and decided not to include?
I'm sure there are. God knows where they are.
Let's get them out.
Well, somebody, I've been contact. Somebody found tapes of us at the place called the Canterbury House in the 4 or 5 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And they want to release it on a record. So there'll be some live stuff coming out.
Great. Well, now tell us about your recordings and your performing in recent years.
I will, but the one thing we didn't mention was the personnel change of the jug band, and maybe that would be interesting to people because shortly after the first record, Bob Siggins had to leave. He was a scientist studying at Harvard, and he went off to do that. And so I needed a banjo player, and that's how we found Mel Lyman, who became the banjo player in the band and eventually the harmonica player in the band. And then later on, we were playing in New York City at the bitter end, and the group that came in to see us was sitting in the front row were the members of the Even Dozen Jug Band, one of whom was Maria D'Amato. Mm-hmm. Jeff Muldor was up there singing Wild About My Love, and she fell in love with him from the audience to the stage. They got to know each other, fell in love. They got married, moved to Cambridge. She became Maria Muldor and joined my band and went on to fame and a few years later with Midnight at the Oasis. Then Mel Lyman, who was playing harmonica and banjo, he was a different kind of banjo player. He played pretty good rhythm banjo, very good rhythm banjo, but it's not what he wanted to do with his banjo playing. So he came to me and said, I don't mind, I'm happy to play harmonica, but could you find another banjo player? Because this isn't really the kind of banjo I enjoy playing. And wasn't I fortunate that Bill Keith had just left Bill Monroe's band. Yes. So we got Bill Keith, one of the all-time great banjo players.
It's a real coup to have him in your band.
Yeah. And then finally Mel left because he had other things to do with his life. And then I didn't have a harmonica player, and I had to replace somebody who could take solos. And instead of harmonica, I was fortunate enough to get Richard Green on violin, who had also just left Bill Monroe's band. So I got 2 of Bill Monroe's ex-members to join my band.
And Richard Green went on to form the band C-Train, which a lot of people listened to in the 1970s.
Correct. So we've been through, the personnel morphed a number of times and changed a number of times. So I thought, people might like to know that.
I'm glad you brought that up. When you're not playing and recording, performing, what do you do?
Well, I have family life. I am a grandfather, and I've got a lot of kids and grandkids, and so does my wife. We live with a bunch of other people. We share a house, so we're taking care of the property and the houses together. So I have, and also I'm doing things. I don't have an agent. I have a booking agent, but I don't have a manager. So as far as doing all my planning for the gigs that I'm doing, getting the hotels and flights and all that stuff, I have to do that stuff myself. So I'm busy at my desk arranging my tours.
And on your recent albums, CDs, what can one hear? What sort of music will one be hearing?
Well, I did one album called Jim Kweskin in the 21st Century. I did that because I called it that because many people think I died in 1968 when I broke up the jug band. So it's me playing jazzy songs, some folk songs or jumpy tunes that were traditional, and some are swing tunes or pop tunes that I do in a folky style. And then I did an album with Jeff Muldor called Penny's Farm, just the 2 of us. When Fritz died in 2005. There were some gatherings together of people for some concerts and tributes, and there was a film being made about the history of jug bands, and so Jeff and I got together, and we hadn't seen each other in a number of years, and we decided to do something in honor of Fritz, and I don't know, we just kind of, it was like time hadn't changed for us. We were still musically very compatible, so we worked up a whole bunch of tunes, went on tour, played for like 3 years, all over the place, yeah, all around from 2006 to 2009, maybe even and further, actually, and made a record called Penny's Farm. I may have the dates, the years wrong, but it's in the last 10 years or so. So there's that. There's the Penny's Farm album. I did an album called Jug Band Extravaganza, because the guy who made the film Jug Band, the history of jug band music, called Chasin' Gus's Ghost, referring to Gus Cannon, put on a concert in San Francisco that had Jeff and Maria and Fritz and me. No, not Fritz. Fritz had passed. I'm sorry. Jeff and Maria and John Sebastian and David Grisman and the Barbecue Orchestra, Fritz's old band. And the concert was just, we nailed it. Everything just happened right. You know, some concerts, they work perfectly, and that concert really worked. So we issued that the whole concert as a CD, and that is called Jug Band Extravaganza. So, you know, and then I did an album in England just a year and a half ago, and I was not jug band music. It was more folky kind of music. So I figured if Eric Clapton can do something acoustic and call it Unplugged, I did something without a jug band and call it Unjugged.
Very appropriate and very clever.
So, you know, I got a bunch of CDs out there. And anybody, by the way, anybody who wants to check it out, you can go to my website, jimkweskin.com, and you can get CDs and you can read more about me.
Yes, it's worth seeing, having checked it out myself. What's the second song you're going to sing for us today?
Written by Pat Donahue, wonderful guitar player and singer and songwriter. Used to be with the Prairie Home Companion. He was the main guitar player in the shoe band. Anyway, he wrote this song called "Would You Like to Play the Guitar?" It's to the melody of an old Bing Crosby hit from the 40s. And if anybody has ever gone out on the street or on a bar and tried to pass the hat and just play music, they'd especially appreciate this song. Would you like to play the guitar? Would you like to play the guitar? Take your money home in a jar from a coffee house or a bar. Or would you rather get a job? Now a job is the thing that makes you get out of bed and work every day until you're dead. Your back is aching and your brain is numb. You just can't wait till the weekends come. But if you don't want to beg or starve or rob, you just might have to get a job. Or would you like to play the guitar? Drive for miles and miles in your car and pretend that you're a big star? Or would you rather book the gigs? Now the agent's the one that we give 20%. What they said is not exactly what they meant. They can clean you out in ways you never thought, 'cause they're good at business and they know you're not. And then they'll sue if you finally make it big. And they're the ones that book the gigs. Or would you like to play the guitar? Make a living that's below par. I admit that it's kind of bizarre. Or would you rather be the wife? Now the wife is the one that has to rescue our butts. She's either a saint or else she's nuts. She gets impatient and she gets annoyed, 'cause she's the one that must remain employed. And by the way, if you want to wreck your life, become a guitar player's wife. A crazy guitar player's wife. And all the monkeys aren't in the zoo. They can be trained to play guitar too. They might play a whole lot better than you. So even if you don't go far, you could be worse off than you are. At least you're playing your guitar.
Jim Kweskin singing Would You Like to Play the Guitar? And Jim Kweskin, thank you for joining me today on Profiles on Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18. Thank all of you out there for joining us as well.